Welcome to The Power of the Mind, where we try to give you tools to help you today be a little bit better than yesterday was, and to give you the chance to understand yourself and other people a little bit better. In today's episode, we talk a little bit about repressed memories, which is sort of an odd topic to have come up, but you learn some stuff about them. They're a lot less wild and crazy than they maybe have been made to sound in the media. And then we talk about the tasks of grief. We talk about how grief works. There's the normal idea of how grief works, and there's some practical realities of grief that are very, very different than what we typically know or have been taught. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Hey guys, it's Alicia with Signals AZ and TG Studios, and today we've got Greg Struve here from Granite Mountain Behavioral, and I can tell you all the letters behind his name. He's an MA, LPC, SCP. I have no idea what that means. So tell me what that means.
Sure. So the MA, I have a master's degree, and I'm licensed as a therapist in the state of Arizona. The SCP is for a 3-year advanced trauma certification, focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder and nervous system dysregulation, particularly related to polyvagal theory. So.
Oh, polyvagal.
Yeah, it's my your favorite, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, I usually fall asleep reading, that.
Sure,
that's kind of what puts me in my
That's a good one to fall
place.
asleep to, yeah.
So you are clinical director and co-owner at Granite Mountain Behavioral Healthcare. We had Jeff on a while back, and it was great. I mean, it's the power of the mind. I mean, there's so many topics we can dive into. I know we're starting to get this started. We had a pilot podcast, kind of see if this would work. And lucky for us, the brain is, there's so many different routes we can take with this. Just what you guys do at Granite Mountain Behavioral. And if you want to remind everybody kind of what your focus is there. And
so we're located in Prescott Valley. We have 118 beds right now. I think we're going to end up, we're just adding 28 beds to that shortly. So we have a lot of beds, and in those beds we put people who are in recovery from addiction and who would like to stop using substances of one kind or another. And they generally have some fairly significant amounts of trauma that they're working through as well, though not always, but much of the time. And as a result of that, there's a lot of what they call co-occurring disorders, such as depression or anxiety, or those are the big two. But every once in a while you get like some bipolar disorder or some other disorders of one variety or another that we offer treatment for. So that's what we do.
Awesome. I've been there a couple of times, and I see people out playing basketball, and they've got there's little housing and a gym and all kinds of cool,
it's a nice place.
Yeah, it's a great place to get better, right? To just get better, and kind of a safe place.
We've been really blessed. We've run into some a couple real good developers in the Prescott area, and we've got a good relationship with them, and most of our facilities are pretty new. And so it's nice to be able to put people into a nice new place, and then give them some comfort and give them a chance to work on themselves, and try to figure out what they need to do to move in a different direction.
Does that usually involve like counseling? And I'm sure quite a bit of counseling and.
Yeah, we offer several services. We offer counseling to the folks who come in there, and that's pretty foundational, right? So we want to understand what, if you wanted to get sort of a broad overview of what counseling is, you figure out what was not in a person's life that should have been, and you help them figure out how to kind of put it there, or what was in their life that shouldn't have been, and help them adjust to that, right? So sometimes, basically that's a broad way of saying, working on abuse or neglect, right? So with abuse, that's stuff that really shouldn't have been there. So how can we adjust your nervous system and your thinking and your life so that you're no longer reacting to that? Neglect is, there are some things that really should have been there and they weren't. How can we adjust the nervous system and the thinking and the processing so that you're no longer functioning in response to the absence of that stuff? So that's sort of the broad overview of counseling, I think. We do a lot of group therapy, work with our people there too. Obviously have a lot of involvement with local 12-step groups. That's pretty invaluable in what we're doing. And then we also offer services. There's a peer support service where we have somebody who's kind of been there and done that, help the clients walk through a lot of the kind of like the life skills side of things. Some of the folks who come to us for one reason or another, they have sort of gaps in their learning in areas, so life skills can be really helpful for that. And
so do you see with, all of your patients, because, when just being an outsider, you see Granite Mountain Behavioral, it's drugs or it's this or it's that, but it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with depression or, sometimes people they seek you out, not because there's a drug abuse problem, but because there's something going on in their life, like you said, the neglect or abuse or.
Well, we see a couple hundred patients a week in our outpatient program. Right. And so with our outpatient program, we can do couples counseling. We can do, individual counseling. There's a pretty robust trauma treatment program that we do as well. Almost everybody. A really interesting study was put out a couple years ago called the ACEs study. Fascinating study. It started out in the late 80s, I think. There was a guy out in California working for a healthcare company, and so he worked with people who are morbidly obese. So if you're morbidly obese and you're on a healthcare plan, the healthcare plan is pretty excited about helping you not be morbidly obese anymore because it costs a lot of money to treat you. You're going to end up in the hospital eventually, and the complications for morbid obesity are expensive complications.
Right.
And so Kaiser Permanente was the name of the healthcare company that decided to hire this guy, and for free, anybody on Kaiser Permanente's plan who was morbidly obese could come in and work with this fellow. And he would put them on a sort of a diet and exercise regimen and help check in with them all the time. There was all kinds of incentives and really help these folks lose, in many cases, tremendous amounts of weight and turn their life around. Except what he noticed is they would set a goal, and with sort of disturbing consistency, right about the time they were going to meet their goal, they'd disappear. And he couldn't figure out why. And the other thing he noticed is that these folks would talk to him, when you get him one-on-one, and they would develop relationships, right? Because they're going to work together over the course of a long period of time. They'd develop relationships. He'd get him in one-on-one, and they would tell him some stories that were really hard for him to hear. Incest, for example, in his education in medical school, he talks about how the idea that incest happened extremely rarely was what he talked about. And he would find just a lot of the people he was working with, a really significant amount of them, I think, either had incest or some form of sexual abuse. And he thought, that is really strange. And he kept kind of making note of it. And eventually he developed this ACEs test. And what's beautiful about the ACEs test is it's really, really simple. It's just 10 questions. And so there's 10 questions. Did these 10 things happen to you before the age of 18? And they cover a pretty broad spectrum of sort of childhood trauma that a person can go through. And what we discovered is that among people with morbid obesity, they would usually have a score of over 6, if memory serves me correctly. And I'm summarizing this, so I might get some of the numbers wrong. And when we started to take this study for the ACEs test to other populations, the addicted population, your percentage likelihood of becoming an addict, if you move from a score of a 3 to a 4, it increases by, and I just hate quoting numbers, but I want to say it's like 2,000 or 3,000%. Like
significant.
It's not close.
Yeah. It's like 5%.
Yeah.
It's
and
huge.
The other thing they discovered, and this is why we brought this up to begin with, is 25% of women and 20% of men have sexual abuse in their childhood. And that was a first-time thing with this ACEs score. People knew it was happening, but they had no idea how prevalent it was.
That is high.
It's
that
really
is super
high. Yeah, it's amazingly high. So anyway, with the trauma department, we help people who have various forms of trauma, and then we have some mental health folks who can work with depression and anxiety. So we service a pretty wide array of behavioral health issues.
It's amazing.
It's fun.
And I know we want to there's a million topics that we can go through. So that's why I'm so excited, to have you on and get this going and really, just explore. There's just so many pathways we can take. And so it's just fascinating. But when Jeff was on, he sparked some, people were interested. And so they had some questions and I'd like to continue doing that if you don't mind, if really, just kind of reach out to the community, and you don't have to give your name. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to tell us where you're from, but if there's a question that you have, or maybe it's for a friend, and you just want to know something for a friend, just, let us know. And we had one on grief, and this one really stuck out to me because it's, for somebody who, I'm fortunate enough to not have, and I hate putting that out in the universe, but I've lived a pretty calm life, so there's, for those of us that have that mentality of, you're grieving, gosh, it's been a week, it's been it's been 6 months, get over it. One of the questions came, they said that there's a gal whose husband died of cancer. He's married her now. It's been 2 years. They have 5 kids, and the 5 kids are from her past relationship. Mm-hmm. And she's still struggling with it, and it's been 2 years. And so this has got to be very difficult for the husband who is, what am I doing wrong? How can I help, my wife who's, it's been 2 years. And for some of us, it's like, it's been 2 years. You've already got this great husband. Move on. What are some things maybe you can?
Oh man, grief is an interesting, really remarkable topic to explore, and it's one that we don't spend much time with in our culture. Our culture is really focused on getting up and going and doing and making it happen, which I have respect for. That's not it's particularly, people sometimes talk about how that's a bad thing, but that's easy to say in a world where food is plentiful. Right. But our ancestors didn't have that thing, so it's we have inherited the proclivity toward hard work, and we came by it honestly. Yeah. Back in the day, if you didn't work hard, you didn't eat. That's pretty. Your family. That's pretty important stuff, and that's another thing. The way we process grief, I think, also probably comes out of that, right? So if we're talking about history, we really, it's so easy to forget that for a long time, if you had. So first of all, one of the things that people did for a lot of history, as far as I can tell, I'm sort of an armchair historian, history buff too, but for a lot of history, people would just have as many kids as they could. And the reason they did that is because a lot of kids died. Oh. The Romans didn't name their kids until they were 6. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah. They didn't name their kids until they why bother? I mean, think about it. Like, how'd your kid die? Well, he got a cut. Right, I think I'm stealing that from a TV show, but that's
he cut his finger.
He cut his finger. It got infected. He died.
That was
life
Number
was
4.
Really, life was really, really hard.
Brutal.
And so, if you spend a bunch of time feeling your feelings and getting into your grief, man, you need to go out and do what you got to do so that the rest of your family doesn't die.
Because there's so much grief, right, at that time. There was so much. If you dwelled on it, how would you ever
everybody had people in their family who... I remember, just as a side note, my kids got really into the Hamilton musical. Oh, yeah. And in the Hamilton musical, there's the Schuyler sisters walk in, and they're singing, and she talks about there's 3 of them. And so my kids were looking them up, and apparently there were actually 15 kids in the Schuyler family, and 8 of them lived to adulthood.
Oh, wow.
Right? Not that abnormal back in the day, but just to get, you're only going back a couple hundred years at that point. We have 15 kids, here's the 8 who lived. Whoa.
We always think of that too. Like our great-great-grandparents had, it was so common to have 10 kids. One, they could help on the land, they could help with the house and take care of each other basically, but I guess that made sense too.
So I always like to add a historical frame of reference to some of human behavior because it makes it easier to understand, and it also takes away some of the proclivity toward making things the old or traditional way of handling something where people want to make it wrong all the time, and I think that's a shame. I don't think that's particularly useful. All that to be said, when we're talking about grief, there's really 4 or 5 predictable tasks of grief, and they were developed. Now, if you're a grief therapists, we get a little leery sometimes about things that are simple and easy for people to understand. We like to overcomplicate stuff, and grief is one that you don't have to overcomplicate. It's really pretty simple. Most folks, when I have an event that creates grief, and the other thing that's just on a side note, I don't want to get too distracted here, but one thing that's important to note is things can create grief for some people that would not create grief for other people. So pets, for example, I like my cat, but I don't have the connection to my pets that I've seen other people or some clients.
I'm not going to miss work, or I'm not going to.
But there are folks for whom, the loss of a pet is a significant amount of grief. The loss of a job can create a lot of grief. Life transitions, moving to a place where I can, where this is my last kid. Moving to a place where this is my last kid who's living at home and they're leaving.
Right.
Moving into retirement. Who am I without my job? leaving school for the final time. Like those are anytime the context of my life shifts really dramatically, there can be grief for some people, and which brings up, so the first task that we deal with grief is typically denial. And denial is great. I'm a big fan of denial. Again, it gets kind of a bad reputation. Very, very helpful until it's not, right? Yeah. At some point, typically we get to a space where it's like, you know what? Because of my denial, I'm experiencing some side effects. I'm experiencing some challenges related to grief. Then the next two really common tasks that show up with grief are anger or bargaining. So anger is I react to the pain that is underneath this stuff. I kind of cover it up with being mad. Then I'll find somebody to be mad at, and if that doesn't work, I'll find myself to be mad at. And the anger is really, again, just like denial, I'm a fan. Anger can be very, very helpful in terms of helping me survive whatever I'm needing to survive and get through whatever I'm needing to get through. It is, unfortunately, for people in grief, it can be easy to get stuck in anger and not continue the process. The other task I mentioned anger, and I also mentioned bargaining. Bargaining is a process where I think woulda, shoulda, coulda. If only I had done this. If only I had said that. If only we could have one more conversation. If only we could, I work with clients who have lost family members to suicide, for example. So a lot of bargaining, a lot of going through.
If I had just been there.
If I just could have said this, and I didn't see that.
If I didn't miss this phone call. But
if I hadn't picked up this call, that was, gosh. Think of a couple. I had a client at one point who had a fiance who got into an accident in Calder, and she didn't pick it up, and he died. Right?
Yeah, because so just to have that last moment.
Yeah, exactly. Ton of pain and challenge there, right? And so the bargaining is the sort of, and the thing with bargaining to understand too is it can be it feels like an obsession. So obsession is just a word for a thought that I no longer can control, right? A thought that is kind of thinking me. Instead of I'm thinking about this, it's thinking me. And bargaining can take a real obsessive quality at times in the context of grief. And what I tell clients who are working with grief is that there's a degree to which we just kind of allow that to be. And the more we're able to allow it to function, the more effectively it kind of works itself through. So we started with denial, then we moved into anger, and then we got into bargaining. And then the next task of grief is just depression and sadness and despair. It's, in essence, it's feeling the grief. It's what everybody thinks of as the grief. It's just feeling the pain. And what we find, and this is pretty important, I think, when I'm working with clients with grief, is that the pain comes when you're ready for it, and you'll be able to handle about what you're ready for, and then it will stop, and you'll move into some of the other tasks. And then if you allow it to, more will come, and it will go, and it will come, and it will go. It comes like a wave, right? And one wave, giant wave will come, it'll crest, it'll go down, and the next wave will come. And after the despair and the depression comes acceptance, but only after. And then, back in the day, this model of grief was developed by a woman named Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza. Yes. Oh, wait, maybe that's a theologian. I can't remember. I think that's who it was, though.
I'm pretty sure.
Schussler Fiorenza, I think, was a theologian. I've got the wrong person.
Let's have our...
Hey, Google. Hey,
Google, Austin Google, Batman.
Austin, who was it who wrote the book On Death and Dying? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That's who it is. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Yeah. You want to?
Yes. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Schussler Fiorenza was my undergraduate degree was in religion, so I remember reading Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza's books. I don't remember what she wrote or what she said. But
he doesn't even Google this. He just has to wait a minute for it to pop in his head. It's just
that's pretty neat.
There's no way he has a phone or computer right there.
That's a gift,
skill,
man. Yeah. What was it? So Kubler-Ross developed this thing in the 70s. She wrote a book on death and dying, and she was looking at the process of grief that happens when one is diagnosed with a terminal illness, right? So you find out you got cancer and you're going to die. And she noticed these 5 stages, And she wrote the book, and the book took off way past what she expected.
Yeah.
And for a long time, people thought that the stages of grief were sequential, and that we have discovered is not the case. The other thing I tell people too is you have to remember that grief works as you grow and get stronger. It's not uncommon for you to be able to uncover more grief later on, right? So when I was 24, my best friend died. Give you an example. Well, the process for me, that was such an adjustment in my life. I mean, that was a solid 2 years before I was even able to move. And mind you, I'm a master's student in counseling. But you'd think an education would help me to move forward differently. But it was a solid 2 years before I could really move into grief, right? I didn't even really start the grief process personally after that relationship, because that was a foundational relationship for me in my life.
And do you think maybe because you have the master's degree that you went, I'm just going to accept it? And then maybe that took long. Yeah.
I think at some level, I certainly do that in other areas. I joke, my wife's a therapist too, so we have a lot of fun with each other, and yeah, it's neat. And sometimes it can be a little bit trying, right? We can get a little.
How are you really feeling?
How are you? Right. What does that really mean to you? Isn't this really about your mother? What?
Always
no.
is.
Yes, it
is.
Shoot.
Come on.
But in this case, I was relatively aware. No, you know what? I think you're totally right now that I think about it. I wouldn't say I ever thought like, I've worked through this, but I was very surprised to find myself completely coming apart in a Las Vegas bathroom in the airport a little while, quite many months after the event. And what had happened in part was I just had the defenses had dropped enough in life, even now. And so it's funny now as I'm talking about it, I can feel emotion coming up, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing you learn in the field. And I tell my clinicians this, I said, if you talk about grief is in the room.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody who talks about grief and is around grief, grief is a universal human experience. It happens when things change and we don't want them to. Right. We all every day sort of assume naively that tomorrow is going to be an awful lot like today. And the degree to which a person, place, or thing, usually a person, but sometimes a place or a thing, the degree to which you anticipate that being in your future is the severity, strength, and longevity of the grieving process that you will go through if that changes without your expectation, particularly without your expectation, right? So that's how we measure the proclivity toward grief in any given situation. So those are the 5 tasks of grief. And so we're bringing it back to this particular individual who is asking about, how do I show up? And I guess what I would say there, what I would suggest is it's pretty normal to have some insecurities about a previously deceased person who you're sort of quote unquote filling in for. One thing that we do as part of our grief is we tend to idealize people after they've passed. Right? We don't go to a funeral and be like, well, he was okay.
Yeah.
He was all right. He watched probably a little too much TV. It's kind of
they always lit up a room.
Yeah,
they're always the
which is
person.
Again, part of the process of being human is to reflect on the positive. And so it can be there's a lot of pressure that can show up when you're trying to fill in for somebody who's been sort of what do they call it in the Catholic Church when they make somebody a saint? I can't remember. Hey, Google, what's that?
But it is. Yeah. It's like, it's you talk about like grief in the stages. I've lost my grandma, and it was definite. I cannot tell you how many years it's been. Yeah. I cannot tell you what month she passed because I don't want to remember that.
Right.
I don't want to look at the calendar and know that that's the day grandma died.
Right.
And I totally went backwards. I accepted it right away. Mm-hmm. She was older. It was her time.
Right.
We're moving on. And then this year, her birthday was February 8th, well, as always. But this was the year that I was like, I'm ready for it. I'm going to talk about it. It's grandma's birthday. And that's when I lost it. That's when it came back and kind of, kicked me in the head because I didn't ever let myself grieve it, really. I mean, I was there when she passed, but and you never remember the crazy with grandma. It was always she was the best. She's the best person ever, but you never... you immortalize them. They were amazing. You never remember the flaws. And so could you imagine being this husband who has flaws every day, because guys are. And now and now he's taking the place of somebody who will forever be on a pedestal, right?
Right. And not just with his wife, but with the five kids,
for sure.
Right. And so the blended family thing is its own. There's a whole different set of unique challenges that can come across in that situation. So that's one piece to recognize. And the second piece is just like you're talking about, right? So you had a delayed process. And when I see families where a spouse dies and there's kids involved, it brings up a little emotion for me even talking about it, because I'm reflecting on a particular situation. But one of the things that I'll see sometimes, as a clinician, you see the heart of the people in front of you.
Right.
And I see the heart of the mother and the heartbreak that she has in her situation, but also the heartbreak because she sees the kids suffer.
Well, you have to be so strong for the kids.
Exactly.
And you can't let them see you break down. You've got to be strong for them.
Sure. So. Well, so I sit with this gal and I see her heart for them and how her heart breaks for them. And there is a degree to which people will sometimes set aside their own process and try to do what they can do to, like you said, be strong for the kids. Yeah. And there's a lot of different. So there's actually some merit in opening up in front of the kids under certain circumstances and with some kind of modeling grief. But again, most folks, right? Most of us in a situation like that, we're just trying to survive. We're just trying to put one foot in front of the other. I still got to go to work. Now I have one less income usually. A lot of times there's a bunch of cost associated with the healthcare situation. And what do I do? So to kind of come back around to it, in this situation, it seems really likely that there's going to be a protracted period where denial is used as a coping strategy, right? Kind of similar to the historical examples we were talking about, like, man, I don't have time to lay in bed for the day. Like, I got stuff to do. People got to go to school.
Kids.
I got diapers to change. I got a life to live. So it's not uncommon at a couple years in to suddenly have the grief hit and to have the pain show up. And the other thing is, if the husband is showing up effectively in the relationship, all of a sudden the pressure is going to start to come off. And now that the pressure's off, well, now there is an opportunity for that grief to come forward and to flow and to do what it does. And then, for a lot of us, the pain of somebody else becomes our pain really, really easily, especially with a loved one. So if I were talking to a husband in a situation like this, my suggestion would be, one is to really become mindful of allowing for that process to unfold and being mindful of those 5 tasks, right? Denial, anger. Okay, she's all grumpy today. What can I do to not personalize that?
Right.
Bargaining. She's talking about what she wishes she could have done. Well, if she had done something different and the person hadn't died, I wouldn't be here anymore. Or some days I feel like she likes him better, which is actually going to inevitably be true because she likes the best version of him is being compared to your version, warts and all, every single day. And if you want to know what's wrong with somebody, just live with them. You hang out with somebody who you live with for very long, and you'll see.
It's just like when the husband's out of town, right? It's like, oh, he's not that bad. He's awesome.
He's good.
He always picks up his laundry. Never, but
that's exactly right.
You miss them, and that's.
And so that's the awareness of the circumstances oftentimes can really facilitate compassion. And the 2 elements that we work on in a clinical situation like this is we work on compassion, and we work on I forgot the other one, actually. We work on compassion, and then we work on, depersonalization, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to put myself in somebody else's shoes, understand what they're going through to the best of my ability, keep in mind the grief model. And then when grief throws stuff my way, instead of thinking, man, my wife hates my guts, what's going on? I think, is this my wife talking, or is this the grief talking?
Right.
And because when I understand it's the grief, I don't really have to get quite as involved and quite as tender about it. I can just allow things to unfold and go. And it does certainly help to have a support system in a situation like that, though. That would be a pretty tough one to take on solo,
Absolutely. It was such a deep topic. Do we have time for one more? You want to take one more question?
I'm not in a rush. We can do one more.
Okay. Let me look. I got a couple. I think I'll go, is it necessary to remember trauma to move past it? It's like memory gaps. And if so, do you remember something that your brain is blocking?
Oh, sure. I get asked this a lot. So I've had the privilege of studying PTSD for a long time and worked with people who've been through things that are unimaginable to most folks. And that's okay, right? Mm-hmm. Thank heavens we live in a world where things like that are not as common.
Right?
Yeah. And again, particularly if we look at history and how challenging life was prior to the Industrial Revolution especially. But so the question is, I have an area or a time in my life that I can't remember. And sometimes it's surrounding a very difficult event. And sometimes it's like a time period. And there's two separate answers for that. If I have a period, so the thing to remember is that my previous memories, this is a really interesting part of the human psyche. Mm-hmm. We talk about, understanding the brain and the mind. One of the things that I do is the memories I have from my past, particularly prior to the age of 6, generally are there because they solve a problem that I either have or anticipate having now. Isn't that interesting? Because if you think about it, prior to the age of 6, there's any number of discrete memories, tens of thousands of options. Right. And everybody picks, most people have a half dozen or a dozen that they can draw to their mind in the short term. That is how the psyche creates its sort of foundational, archetypal way of relating to the world around us. If we go through a traumatic experience, for example, a divorce might be sort of a standard example of this where I see it a lot. I think of a client one time, and her parents got divorced when she was 8 years old. And she comes in and she's talking to me and she says, well, I don't think I had a bad childhood, but I got to tell you, I can't remember anything prior to age 8 or 9. Oh, okay, great. So we keep on talking, and then it comes out, the divorce happened. And then she says, I'm a little worried later. She said, I'm a little worried that maybe my dad, might have been inappropriate with me in some respects. And I said, well, and maybe that's why I can't remember something. I said, that could be the case, and we can certainly explore that. And one other thing that's really interesting to note is that when the context of your life changes, a lot of times people will decide that the method they have to interpret the world is no longer useful, right? So these early memories are there to answer. So if I asked you about a time you were lost or stuck and when you were a kid, and you pulled out the first memory you had, and it might seem completely innocuous or not related at all, and it would probably help if I didn't prep you for what we're talking about. But if you pulled out a memory of what happened when you were lost or stuck, an example I can remember is a gal who was walking down the road, and she had a dog, and the dog got away. And so she went and got her neighbor, and she and her neighbor looked for the dog, and they found the dog, right? Super kind of mundane, like childhood memory, right? What we would often find with somebody like this, and not always, but often, is that they are, for example, very willing to ask for help for solving problems from people in their environment. Right? Whereas somebody else might have a memory of, I'm going to find the dog myself and not going to, or I asked for help and the person was terrible and didn't help me find the dog at all, and they were mean to me or whatever. So again, that particular experience informs me of how to solve a certain problem. If I have a really traumatic event, it might be that I decide to cast aside all of the previous data I had for solving the daily problems of living. And instead I construct a new one with a new set of memories from that date forward. And so what we discover is that the memories aren't repressed per se, they just aren't particularly useful. And as the course of therapy develops and the nervous system settles, oftentimes memories will come back, and we may or may not find them to be particularly disturbing. The other situation where this happens is where people have like a really horrific experience or series of experiences or just life early on, and their mind chooses to compartmentalize what happened in a way that they don't have access to it anymore. And the reason we do that is all of us have a frame of reference that we use to go about going about, right? To kind of go about in this world. If that frame of reference gets challenged too hard, it is so overwhelming that we will end up basically curled up in the fetal position and just, I mean, it's, if you have, and you see this actually with people in cults, when somebody in a cult discovers that the cult leader has been doing what cult leaders do, the denial is often so hard that they won't, even if it's right in front of them, they won't do it. If they will do it, the impact is, it just disassembles the psyche. It's really, really just foundationally. So what the brain does in that situation, where there is this experience of horror, oftentimes is it'll put it away and it'll leave it away until you can handle it. And sometimes when you think you can handle it and when the nervous system thinks you can handle it are different. Right. And that's where I have folks who come to me and say, this thing happened to me 30 years ago and now I'm having nightmares. And I don't know why. PTSD actually a lot of times takes 7 or 10 years to show up. Wow. Yeah, people expect it to, and this is another thing where people expect it to happen right away and to be able to get a grip on it. Da. Now, when you're working with people, I've got some military vets that I've worked with, it's not at all uncommon for things to go well for a while. And then one day things...
Because your brain's protecting you from dealing with it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's protection. Right. And then as you're doing, and I tell people, there's no need, A, you probably can't dig it out anyway. B, it'll come, the question was, if so, how do you remember something your brain is blocking? Well, you remember it by, the normal answer for me would be, you do some clinical work with a licensed, with a clinician who knows what they're doing. And as a result, you settle and you settle and you settle, and then the nervous system decides you can handle it and it'll come up on its own, right? But we let it come up on its own time.
But I have to wonder, is it, if there's parts of your life you can't remember and our brain is taken over to protect you from remembering,
right? Isn't
it better to just sometimes just let it be?
Oh, very fair question. The answer is maybe. The benefit of allowing a process to unfold and allowing the material to work through is that you no longer live with the side effects and the symptoms of it. Okay, if I have survived something that is particularly challenging or awful, my nervous system is going to respond in a particular way, right? So I can think of an example of a client who had some real strong side effects in terms of being in an environment with loud noises. Okay, so the way out of that, there's two approaches to that clinically. One approach is the Immersion Approach, and they use this at the VA a lot, where they put you into like they'll strap you into a VR machine and put you into an environment with a lot of loud noises. Okay, and eventually you get used to it and you get habituated to it. Now, the downside of that is it can overwhelm the nervous system and put you into a thing called freeze. So freeze is where your nervous system shuts everything down and you can still function, but you sort of feel like you're floating outside your body, or at least you just feel like you're kind of a dismembered head, right? This is me actually for a lot of my adolescence and early. I was a little clumsy. I'm still a little clumsy. My wife says I'm still clumsy. I don't see it. I don't see it, but right? That's what I've heard.
You haven't knocked anything over here.
So there's a lot of freeze that can show up from that approach, although it will arrest the symptoms. The other approach is to utilize, there are some therapeutic approaches. EMDR, somatic experiencing, are the two of the more popular ones that will allow the system to kind of move through the stimulus that created the fear of loud noises. And when it's done, it's done. Excuse me, you don't have that fear anymore and you're good to go. So that's the benefit of it. The answer to your question, should I just leave it be, really lies in
how is it affecting you?
How is it affecting you and what am I wanting? Right. What am I wanting in my life? Do I, one example we could reflect back on is you shared about your grandmother, right? So this year you decided I'm going to allow it to come.
Ready.
Right? I'm ready. I'm going to do it. So some people would choose to just never do it.
Yeah.
The benefit of doing it is when you're done, you feel more, for lack of a better word, embodied or alive. Like there's
true. Yeah. It's I can talk about her a little bit more now.
Exactly.
Without freaking out or, just not talking about her.
Yeah. And what we might discover too is there are other areas in your life. The psyche, I think about the human psyche as having a finite capacity handle material and to kind of stuff it. So I have folks sometimes who have a lot of trauma and they say, I don't want to deal with it. I say, well, you don't have to. Good news. But it's kind of like having a beach ball and holding it underwater. You can do it. You just can't do anything else.
That's it, right?
You can do it. And now it might not be like a perfect parallel for your situation, right? Yeah, maybe it's a small beach ball, but it's just one less thing.
It did take time, though. It did take energy to not think about it.
That's exactly it. And so that's probably the answer. The most succinct answer to your question I can think of is like, if I choose to deal with this, I will have more energy for other things, right?
And it allows me to now think of the positives of grandma, not think about her at all, because I didn't want to, didn't want to, I didn't want to be sad. And so now I can talk about her and kind of laugh about some things with my kids. And it's only been a couple weeks, but it's just, I notice I'm talking about her way more than I did before. I decided to
bringing her up on a podcast.
Right. Yeah. I'm healed. No, I don't know. It's just, I mean, it's taken a while. I still don't know the date, and I don't want to know the date, but it's, it was a bad day, but it was, I'm dealing with it better now, but I had to be ready for it. I had to be okay to go, okay, her birthday's coming up. And, and I even told my daughter, I said, grandma's birthday was yesterday. And she goes, I knew that, but I didn't want to tell you, because even my kids knew not to talk. They know when she passed. We all went there together, and but it's just protecting mom. Like she doesn't want to think about it. So
sure.
Yeah.
So another good example too, right? So there's less energy on your part devoted to not thinking about it, and then in the family system, because we all work, a family system, the sum is greater than the whole of its parts, right? We're all kind of together in that regard. Your growth and process helps everybody year round. So.
Sure, yeah, because now the kids are like, oh, we can talk about this a little bit. It's okay, so.
That's always true, by the way. When somebody pursues healing, the people in their environment reap the benefit.
Yeah, but it's interesting. My first question was, well, can't we just leave it? Can we just not talk about it?
Well, again, that's human nature. Why not? Yeah. Who wants to,
why go through it if you don't have to?
Most people avoid pain. That's biologically, that's a pretty smart thing to do. If something hurts, that's nature's way of saying stay away.
Stay away.
But psychologically, we run into some challenges as we continue to do that, right? It, just because of what we're talking about, it requires a certain amount of energy. And there's a certain amount of, I always talk to my clients in recovery from addiction, and I say, a lot of addiction is about living in lies. And recovery is about learning to live in truth, right? And there is a certain sort of profound truth in pain, and especially in grief. Like grief honors the person and what she meant to you, how important she was. And it's a real move toward truth when I can just sit down and kind of be with that. And whatever that is for the people that I'm working with, that's a lot of their stuff, is to come to grips with the truth. And that tends to be very healing.
Yeah. I know I feel better. It's still hard. It's still, we'll get there. But, like we said at the beginning of all this, there's so many paths we can take, and there's so many topics for this podcast, I don't want to put you in a box. I want you to be able to show up every week, or, as often as you want to come on and talk about different topics. And, for those of you that have enjoyed this and have questions, send them in to us, go. We'll have a link on our article that's, you'll be able to fill out, and we'll have this up on Facebook and Instagram. And if you've got questions, Greg's got the answers.
I love that stuff.
It's awesome.
It's always fun to be one of the gifts of social media, although it's an awful lot of cost to social media too. But one of the gifts is just being able to sort of be more broad in terms of spreading and disseminating information that can be helpful.
Well, and I think this is providing kind of that platform of, I really have questions, but I'm afraid to ask somebody. This gives them the opportunity to ask without any, there's no stigma, there's no judgment, which I'm sure in your environment, at Granite Mountain, that's a step too. This is an easy way. This is an easy way to go, hey, I just want a little bit, but
sure.
They can reach out to you, and if they've got something deeper, or if you're listening to this, because it's, for me, just listen, I could have listened to you all day, the things with grief, and just listening to you go through different stages. And it's like, it makes sense, but you don't think about it until you hear it. And I go, oh my gosh, I did go through acceptance first. And then years later, I was, okay, I'm ready to grieve now, but just a little bit. And so it was just interesting talking that through. And, I think I started the podcast with, lucky for me, I haven't been around too much trauma, so I don't have to, I've never, but then talking to you, I'm like, there's so many things that you bring up that I'm going, okay, yeah, there's, there's things that I overlook, or there's things that, so, we do come from that era of get over it, stop whining, get back to work.
Sure.
Don't be sad, smile more.
That's right.
And, I know my parents were, and I'd see I parent that way, why are you sad? Because kids, our kids in this new generation, I've got kids 30 and under that are in touch with their feelings, and they want to talk about things, and they're sad, or they're depressed, or this makes them anxious, or anxiety is one where I'm like, oh my gosh, just stop being anxious about this. Don't worry about it.
Right.
But that's, I was a mom, and I don't have time to be anxious about things.
Sure.
And so I'm hoping that there are parents like me that are watching this, that can get some insight on what their kids are going through. And I'd really love to develop, go as we're developing our podcast, really kind of shine the light on, as a parent, what are my kids going through, and how is this generation different from, the way we were raised? Right. And so, there's just, like I said, a million paths to go down. And if you guys have questions, we're going to get Greg back in here so he can answer them. And we're super excited to have him. And, if you've got questions in the meantime, what's a website or a phone number that they can call you or reach out to you?
I have gregstruve.com. So that's a pretty easy one.
And it's STRUVIE.
No I.
Just STRUVE.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's an option. And then Granite Mountain BHC stands for Behavioral Healthcare. Granite Mountain. I tried to buy granitemountain.com, but the guy wouldn't sell it to me.
Gosh.
I was very bummed out about that.
So granitemountainbhc.com.
Yep.
And check out our billboards. We've got you up there. If you need to talk, give them a call. It's not just about drug addiction. As we didn't even touch on that today. So tons of topics. So I'd love to have you back.
Oh, yeah.
Love to explore this some more.
I'm looking forward to it. Let's make it a habit.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time on Power of the Mind. Thanks so much.
If you have a question or something you'd like us to discuss here on Power of the Mind, we would love to hear from you. Our email address is stories, STORIES, @signalsaz.com. That's stories, STORIES, @signals, SIGNALS, AZ.com. Look forward to hearing from you.